Order, order. This is our next session focusing on Nigeria by the International Development Select Committee. We've got two panels today, and our first panel is looking at local approaches to peace building. Thank you for joining us, witnesses. I wonder if I could ask you to introduce yourselves and talk about the work that you do that receives UK government funding. Hamsatu, if I could come to you first, because you've got a big UK aid sticker behind you. So introduce yourself, your organisation, and why that banner is behind you, please.
My name is Hamsatu Allamin. I'm the founder and executive director of Allamin Foundation for Peace and Development. We are based in Maiduguri, extreme northeastern Nigeria. So my organization is a local civil society organization focused on education, gender, human rights, and peace building. In fact, all our interventions are human rights based, peace and survival centered. And we work, in fact, inclusively with all stakeholders in the northeastern Nigeria, following being registered as a result of the what do I call it, voicelessness in the northeastern Nigeria in the context of the Boko Haram insurgency. In fact, the northeast is one of the most underdeveloped part of Nigeria, in the sense that, in fact, all those things that are committed in terms of atrocities on by both sides of the conflict, either by the Nigerian military or by the extremist Boko Haram, you can, in fact, just people just look at it as common. Nobody talks about it. Nobody says anything as if it's just common. And then, in the context of the conflict, over 1 million people have been displaced, and then a lot of survivors, victims, in fact, community of victims and survivors are growing by the day. Vulnerability is doubling, but in all the same, in fact, you will never hear the perspectives or the voices of victims and survivors. Hence, in my own NGO, we now focus on victims and survivors of the conflict and ungoverned space where, in fact, nobody talks and nobody speaks about it. One, for fear of retribution, either from the almighty Nigerian military or the most vicious Boko Haram, because the perpetrators of the abuses in the context of the conflict are these two. So we focus as a woman, and then women-led organization with my advanced age. I feel that this is a gap which nobody addresses, not even international NGOs, in fact, talk about human rights in the context of the conflicts because of what I said earlier. So I now principally focus on that, and then created an umbrella network of victims and survivors with over 13 different social networks of victims and survivors. In fact, so that with over 13 different social networks of victims and survivors in different categories of vulnerability. In fact, that is what attracts.
Hamsatu, I don't know if you can still hear us. Your sound has gone, so it might be worth switching off the video and coming back. Could I move on to Saratu, please?
Thank you very much, ma'am. So at the Center for Civilians in Conflict, we are an organization that prioritizes civilian protection, and we do that in various tiers of intervention. So one of the pillars where we go into communities to understand the drivers of the conflict is in research. So we do either deep research or light touch research to understand what are the conflicts, what are the drivers, and how then can we develop programs that can then respond to the conflict. Advocacy is also part of the other pillar of our intervention. We go in and we advocate with community leaders, security sector leadership, and of course the government of Nigeria, to explain why it is important to have civilian protection at the center of all military and counterinsurgency operations. We also go in with training as part of our effort for security sector reforms, because we understand that in the military, there is the doctrine, and then very little is being done in practically putting those human rights approaches in military operations. So for instance, when we do our trainings, part of the things we would ask security forces would be, now that you understand what civilian protection is, how do you carry that out physically? It could be during your shooting ranges, you would use civilian silhouette, because we understand that the current conflict is not the regular conflict that we all know. It is now a conflict that's been fought in highly populated environments and with civilians at the center. We also acknowledge in the CIVIC that civilians are not only beneficiaries, but they are also agents of their own protection. And so when we go into communities, we try to prioritize resilience building in civilians. We train them on understanding what are some of the conflict drivers, what are the risks they would be exposed to. And we look inward to say, what are those things you've been doing as a community before anyone came in to protect yourself? And we build on those approaches to help communities also better protect themselves and then advocate for their own protection. So in a nutshell, that is basically what we do. With the UK funding, one of the things we are majorly doing is to try to improve civilian protection outcomes by improving civil-military coordination. In the past, we've had, of course, concerns in communities that communities do not trust security forces. Security forces also do not understand communities. And so we try to build dialogue platforms and community engagement platforms where communities and security forces would sit on the same table in a safe space where they can discuss issues that concerns their protection and the risk, of course, that comes as a result of some of these military operations.
Thank you. I've not heard the expression agents of their own protection in relation to civilians.
Oh,
and well,
yes.
as we see more civilians being targeted, I think that's a really powerful statement and really powerful work that you do. Hamsatu, glad that you're back with us again. I just wanted to say that I think you were very modest in your introduction of your organisation because you founded it and you do some brave and remarkable work. So thank you very, very much for what you do. Could I bring Aisha in as well, please? Could you tell us about your organisation, your role in it, and how you work with the UK, please?
Good evening once again. I am Aisha Abdurrahman. I work in the capacity of Executive Director for Bridge for Women Development Initiative. Bridge for Women Initiative, acronym BOWDI, is a women-led organization. It was founded by a young woman way back from 2012, and it was registered 2014, who is very passionate about women and girls when the insurgency was at its peak. She took to it and saw the huge gap where her peers were in difficult situation with nowhere to go, with nothing to fall back on, and knowing how the margin of risk when it comes to women and girls, she took it to herself to see what difference and what change can she bring on board to see that she, to some extent, bring a cushion or a kind of hope for younger women. So BOWDI currently, we work with women and girls where we push for gender gaps. We try to close gender gaps. We try to shift from short-term relief to more sustainable recovery for women and girls. We bring empowerment, let me say, we build resilience. And for a project that we are working currently with funding from FCDO, it's a project where we're doing empowerment, we're doing empowerment, we're doing GBV protection concerns where we address GBV issues, we do case management, we do psychosocial support. We have safe spaces across 4 to 5 locations currently. And for now, I think this is the basic things that we're doing with the funding from the FCDO. And also part of the component of the project is also vocational skills. We are providing vocational skills to women and girls where they will be able to sustain themselves even beyond the project life cycle.
Thank you very much. David.
Hello, Hamsatu. I don't know if you recall, but we met in Abuja along with my colleague James, who's here with us this afternoon as well. And we did have a discussion there about why people join the extremist or bandit groups. But do you want to just, for the benefit of the wider committee, say why you think people are joining these groups?
He's muted.
Hamsatu, we can't hear. There
Sorry.
you go.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, I said the internet went cut off, so I missed you people. I couldn't tell you what I do precisely, even with the UK finding. So briefly, before I go directly to answer your question directly, in fact, I said all our work are victims and survivor centers. We have 13 different social networks of victims and survivors with over 42,000 registered members. So during one meeting in Wilton Park in 2020, in fact, all the governments were there talking about resources from international community to fund the reintegration of these ex-combatants. In fact, we are the only organization that speaks about victims and survivors. So as a result, therefore, the FCDO through the British High Commission in Nigeria said, well, they have to, though we are a small civil society organization, we have to be carried on board because I advocate about transitional justice, that because transitional justice comes in the context where for conflict situation, but we have a peculiar situation where the conflict is still going on. The war is still going on. And then the part of the other part of the conflict are surrendering and putting up their arms, while grievances is being generated across the society. Grievances not only against the extremists, but even on government forces and then on government of itself by the communities. So we were funded by the FCDO now to now start mobilizing stakeholders towards a transitional initiative where we undertook a perception survey across all stakeholders to understand what is their perception, what is their take for peace, what are their preconditions for peace, and then in fact we came to bring in a different perspective of who.
Oh no.
Saratu, maybe I could just ask you, while we're trying to get Hamsatu back, will reduced UN and UK funding to Nigeria have an impact on extremism and instability? And I think you're muted as well, with.
Yes, a reduction of the funding on intervention would, of course, have a huge impact on how all the efforts that has been put in place to reduce the current crisis. What that in essence entail is that there would be fewer partners in communities where the most vulnerable populations are residing. And with that, of course, the needs continue to grow. And with fewer partners to respond, yes, it would impact negatively on the current efforts that we have put in place. For instance, CIVIC operates in 3 states of the Northeast, and we have a total of 450 community volunteers in the community who then support community with risk monitoring, conflict assessment. Now, that in itself is not enough to go round. So imagine when there is a funding cut, I think we will not be able to do much. As it is, we're doing the much we can do, but with funding cuts, yes, that would negatively impact all the progress and the efforts that have been put in place.
There's been a recent significant intervention by the United States in Nigeria. What impact has that had on the situation in terms of instability?
So there are reports that there has been considerable success, but you would also agree with me that there still continues to be pockets of attacks. In the last 10 or 11 days, there has been over 50 deaths associated with banditry and insurgency, about 85 people abducted, and over 1,200 people, facing secondary displacement. Yes, the support is and a positive one, but then the question remains, is this going to be a part of the general strategy ongoing to curb insurgency and the ongoing conflict, or is it going to be a one-off intervention? Because if it's a one-off intervention, I do not see it as a sustainable one. So yes, there has been some reports of successes, but also there's a mix of perception of also from the communities, conversation with communities where we work in, of course, amidst all the other, we live in a time of misinformation, disinformation, and very wrong information getting into the wrong hands. So communities are concerned if the airstrikes jointly being carried out by the US and the Nigerian government is not a one-off thing, and if it is, for how long is it going to be happening? So one of the narratives we are trying to push is that when such an effort is being put in place, communities need to be carried along because they need to understand how long this would be going on and what would be the impact on their everyday lives.
Hamsatu, can you hear us?
Yes, now I can hear you. The internet is terribly bad on my side. Sorry.
Okay. So I think you were going to tell us why you think people join extremist and bandit groups.
Several reasons, honestly. One, yes, by force, by commission, and then omission. One is abduction, sometimes because of the protection level, protection is very, very, very low. And then we are living in a porous situation so that easily when you are not protected, for example, particularly for the vulnerable group, both men and women, you can be abducted by force and then join. And then for several others too, their parents are in the mainstream group of insurgency. So when you are born into that group, you are just you naturally belong here, and then you do not know anything but what you are born into and then brought up in. And then thirdly, by marriage too, women, in our context, marriage is very, very expensive for both, particularly for the men. And then for the girls too, where their families could not afford, and then because of the poverty level and others, girls are easily married up to anybody who can cater for them so that the family can take up the burden of catering for her. And then another reason is security too. Yes, in a context where the security has gone to a level that even those who are saddled with the responsibility of protecting us cannot even protect themselves. In the context where we see the security actors themselves falling victims in the hands of these insurgents, it's better for people feel in fact really more comfortable aligning themselves, joining the other groups so that at least they can accord, whether that is logical or not, that is another issue, so that they can in fact be in the protection of the insurgents themselves. And then another reason also why people join is they look at joining as an empowerment, because in the extremist enclave, for example, there are funny things that the world is yet to come to reality to the of the situation with. In fact, in the extremist world, a child, no matter how small, for example, a 13-year-old boy will come and tell us he has 2 wives in the bush. While in our own society, even the mature person from the age of 20 to 27 can hardly get resources to marry. So joining there now, he has the leverage of getting any number of women. In fact, these young men, 13-year-old, coming to tell us, in fact, what they are missing in the Nigerian context is this lack of maybe social intimacy or marriages at this early age that is kind of forbidden in our context, while in the extremist wars it is even allowed. So you see, with this kind of joining extremist group now gives you a license to take any number of women you want and then be comfortable with. And then the empowerment aspect of it also, they don't care whether you are a woman or a man, or even you are how old you are, but so long as you are committed to their ideology, that you can be able to kill your parents or even destroy your communities and whatever, so that yes, these are acts of bravery, and these things are instilled to them in the name of religion. So, in a context where people are lacking the basic knowledge of the religion that they wish to follow, then whoever comes and then offers whatever in the name of religion, it is wholeheartedly welcome. So many of these communities, especially in the minority groups of Gamarugu, these Ulaula and others, join to get a sense of belonging and then a sense of empowerment. It is empowerment to them. And even the women will tell you that I joined because I feel I am empowered. I feel I can change the world. Yes, because they can, at whatever age, they can be given the arms, they can be trained, and then given position status in the community of the extremists, which in our own context, even someone like me with my age, with my little education, in fact, there are so many spaces that are close to me, which is not an open society. In fact, the spaces for even for participation of people like us as women is very limited. But then in the extremist world, these things, they are very, very liberal and others. So these are some of the things that entice, in fact, many young people, especially women, and then the young ones, and then even the children who have come back now. In fact, when they send them viral videos of their cohorts in the bush, dressed in new military uniform, reading the Quran, they said, "Oh, Mama, we have to go back to the bush because this is where religion happens." While in the context of ours, such things, in fact, even the spaces for education is not well being catered for, and then children do not get ample opportunity to pursue their educations, and then women do not get ample opportunity for empowerment, for education, and then for even recognition. So these are some of the gaps that exist that in fact push a lot of our men and women into the extreme enclave. And to date, these kind of things exist. And then for people, civil society activists like ours, then in fact, we now started with funding from the FCDO. We started mobilizing people together to now develop policy recommendations to government. And then as we gather this recommendation, we now interact with wide range of stakeholders, where in fact, even the Nigerian military, powerful as it is, tell me that, Mama, we, the military in Nigeria, are victims. We are victims of your people who know the Boko Haram, see them and allow them come to kill us without even alerting us. And these are the factors that my people, the people of my society, look at. Yes, when you people cannot protect them yourself, how can I align myself to go with you so that I can be killed? It's better for me to remain safe with the extremists than aligning with the military forces. And this is how the military now look at us, telling me they are victims. And then the Boko Haram will tell me, Mama, we are victims of your society's injustice. So in this context, everybody claims to be a victim. And this is how victims we are. So we now bring them together to understand how victims we are. Yes, listen to each other. And then the the British High Commission in Nigeria, through their trainings to the Nigerian military on human security especially, now begin to take people like us to be part of the resource persons. I, for one, was given the portion of women, peace, and security to handle in the training. So in that, we bring this reality to the faces of the Nigerian soldiers so that they can see, which under normal circumstances, we couldn't have even dare talked about it.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive. Can I ask my colleague James to ask some more questions about women and girls, please?
Thank you, Chair, and I'll come to Aisha if that's okay. You talked earlier about closing gender gaps and building resilience among women and girls. What do you see as being the specific risks to women and girls, specifically in northern Nigeria?
Well, specifically for northern Nigeria, what we face for the risk of women is GBV.
Yeah.
Because when a woman is in a displaced environment, let's say we have camps, and now the camps are also closing, which is also a huge gap. We have huge risk coming up because these women have no protection whatsoever. And then we have high cases of GBV, molestations around the camp, violent extremism by different sects, the extremist sects, the people that are also part of the people who are trying to bring relief to them. And then we find out that those women are in a very, very severe, vulnerable situation more than anyone else. Because most times now we can say if we don't have shelter as a woman, you sleep under the street or you sleep outside without a shelter, we can imagine the kind of risk that brings. We've seen increasing numbers when it comes to rape cases. We've seen increasing numbers when it comes to health issues. We've seen different kind of diseases when it comes to women and girls. And these are happening most of the times just because they are women and girls. So that gender vulnerability that is attached to them specifically is one of the highest risks that we are seeing within this crisis from the onset till now. Because we know women have specific needs when it comes to their well-being. Some of them are pregnant when they come to this camp. Some of them are just lactating. And then we also have adolescent girls who are out of schools, who have to resort sometimes to hawking. And then during that hawking, you would see GBV happening to them on the street. And we also have situations where you see we are doing transactional sex and those camps. So the risk around gender-specific violence is very high during this crisis. And looking at it from the perspective of people working directly on the ground and with the increasing different kind of conflicts that we're having, because now it's not, you cannot say this is the problem, and you cannot say this is the specific kind of conflict we are going through in Nigeria. 1 minute it's banditry, the other minute it's a bomb blast at one place or another, abductions of women. And if you see, when abductions happen in these roads, you would see women and girls, when they are abducted, they would be raped, they would be maltreated. When, like, some of them, when they come back, they're already pregnant. Some of them would never come back. Like, it's very, very severe and dynamic when it comes to women and girls, and when it comes to dealing with this specific crisis that we're having in the Northeast.
How are you? It's a very clear description there of the gender vulnerability as you describe it. How are you working with women, especially mothers? You mentioned there some very young mothers and women that are being raped and then conceiving and having children. How are you working with them to respond to and prevent further extremism?
For us, what we do is we have safe spaces across all the locations of intervention, where we give them access to basic needs when it comes to hygiene, health, and also we do referrals to medical care. We give them case management, where you have a case manager who would work on them. And then once that is done, we also give them psychosocial supports at our safe spaces. And then once we see you're stable enough, we give you an empowerment. We train you on skills. We give you basic literacy and numeracy for you to be able to carry on. And for those young adults that we have, I don't know, sometimes it's very difficult to categorize them, because we have children who are now parents, because she's still 14 or 16, but she's now a mother, and she should have access normally to education and to be able to have basic needs. Her basic needs are more like half adults and also half children. So it's very, very dicey. But what we do is we have second chance education, where we have been working with other partners, where we take them back to school and then find them maybe a kind of skill where they would be able to sustain themselves, because now we are focusing more on sustainable recovery and also social cohesion across our communities, to give kind of build their leadership skills, the local leadership skills, where whether we're there or not, they would be able to put those girls in a way that they would sustain themselves, their children, and also the community through nutrition activities, also through livelihood activities. We also do sometimes through the protection activities, because when we talk about protection, I feel like all the components fall under them. So we try to give them those basic responses.
That sounds really, really impressive range of things that you're doing there. Can I just turn to Saratu for a moment, including women and girls and women and girls who've been through some of those experiences that were just being described, including them in the peace building process, is extremely important. What do you see the benefits of being in using women and girls in that way and in that process?
So the benefits are very many. And one of the things we've seen in the past is that the reason why even the Boko Haram insurgency expanded beyond what it is because within the communities we are, children have more access to their mothers than their fathers. And so some of the mothers did condone some of these activities that led to, of course, young people joining the insurgency. Now, having understood that, we also understood the fact that, of course, conflict affects women and girls disproportionately. And oftentimes women are at the receiving end, being the first responders. They're the ones that are left to manage and deal with the aftermath of the conflict. That, of course, includes reversal of roles. Women who were initially not then taking care of homes and being heads of households are now being put as heads of household. They have to go to the farm. They have to go to the fishing units to do that. And we also understood that part of the challenge is also in accessing livelihood for women was, of course, exposure to risk, where they are abducted when they go to the farms or when they go to collect firewood. And so part of all that learning, one of the things we've done is in CIVIC, we have identified, like I said, we have what we call the Community Protection Committee members. These are volunteered committee members who have decided to support their communities in ensuring communities are safe. It is a makeup of 50 people in the community, both men and women of equal numbers. But I would tell you that most of the successes we have recorded has been led specifically by women, because in this context, women have a lot to lose. And so for instance, in the leadership of these groups, women are given opportunities to lead the groups, lead conversations, lead advocacy visits to security forces, to government stakeholders, to then advocate from that point, because they are the mothers, they are the sisters. In general, they are not only the present, but they're also the future foundation of communities. And so carrying them along is very key and a very sustainable way. When you have women taking active participation in peace building process, in developing strategies that prevent or protect communities, you would have very good intel. For instance, in one of our communities in Borno State, in Konduga to be precise, after certain former fighters had surrendered, their families were then relocated and reintegrated into one of the communities. And in their normal activities like protection monitoring, risk identification, they identified that the community had a high number of children who were out of school. Of course, then they also understood, based on trainings they've had, that these children could be a soft target for people who want to recruit minors for criminal use, for certain abuses as well. And they then worked with some partners who were providing educational support to then ensure that those children were enrolled. So in total, about 190 children were enrolled into school because of the efforts of some of the women Community Protection Committee members we had. The flood of 2024 that happened in Maiduguri as well, when there were communities who couldn't access the temporary shelter in the camp, ran into a certain community where we had our community-based protection committee members. It was the women who, first of all, identified, oh, there is a number of people coming into our community. We don't know what they're doing. They went to engage the women to say, okay, where are you coming from? And they got the information, came back, met with the other group members, and they said, okay, we may not have enough within the community, but we can immediately start supporting these community members. Yeah. They brought them into their homes, provided from whatever food they had, and made sure that they were not on the street out there, but they had some kind of shelter. And that moved the community leaders to also support and provide additional support to them. So yes, having women as part of peace building process and on the table where we discuss strategies to continue to keep civilians safe is very, very key.
Thank you for that. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Aisha, could I ask a question to you? How can civil society organisations work with local people to develop an early warning system for conflict and instability?
I think that's something that we've been working on. Most international organizations, we have a kind of a consolidated way of having communication. We have a coordination platform where we call it the Civil Society Organization Platform, where we devise means of how to have more contact with the locally, with the indigenous people, prefer to call them sometimes the indigenous people. Usually when we have a programming, let's say like the procurement project we are doing with FCDO, what we do is most of our staff, volunteers, social workers, they come from the community. They are community members. So whatever we do, we train them. We let them understand how it's done. We have communication with the leadership of the community. We work closely with the government. We also work closely with the traditional rulers and also the youth-led organizations around there, or associations, as we would call them. We work with women associations across those communities, and then that gives us an opening for communication. So we have a 360 way of communicating. They communicate to us, we communicate to them. They warn us when they see threats. We also warn them when we see threats. So it's a kind of collaborative way of working. It's not an independent way of working that we say this is what we come with and you just have to accept it. No, this is what we are proposing. How do we see it, and where do you want us to channel this? What are the problems? We sit down, we find solutions to it together, and then we say we're forward. For early warning signs, I can see improvement, especially after the floods that happened last year. We realized that the communication was kind of porous, and now we are working with that by also training them to see that these are signs that bring this, especially when it comes to climate change. Now we are giving a lot of messaging when it comes to climate change. We also teach them how to work with gadgets, and we also ensure that we don't keep information to ourselves. Like sometimes, for example, we being a national NGO, we have information coming from international NGOs, we have information from UN organizations. We also have more contact with government. So we have a lot of hid information, and we ensure that with the established structures that we have in the localities, we communicate to them to say, these are the ABC signs that we think would come. It will be good if you do this. Or what do you think you would do? What system have you put in place? Where do you want us to support you? I think these are ways of working with the localities for us.
Thank you. We're also doing a parallel inquiry on women, peace and security. And everything the three of you have said confirms to me that women and girls need to be at the centre of both early warning but also any solution when it comes to securing lasting peace. Thank you so much for all that you do on a daily basis, and also thank you for being such excellent witnesses to us. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time. And hopefully we will keep in contact, and hopefully the report that we do will do justice to the work that you're doing there on the ground. Thank you all very much. Can we now shift to our second panel, please? This one is going to focus on national and regional instability across Nigeria. We are very lucky to have two panellists. We have Bryan and we have Tog. Thank you both. I wonder if you could both start by introducing yourselves and your organisation. Bryan, could I start with you, please?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Bryan Weiner. I am a Senior Regional Program Manager with Search for Common Ground. Search for Common Ground is one of the largest dedicated peace-building organizations in the world. We work in more than 35 countries, and our primary mission is preventing violent conflict. We've been in Nigeria for a little bit more than 20 years. We started in 2004, addressing some of the core conflicts in Nigeria, from the Niger Delta insurgency to farmer-herder conflict, interreligious conflict in the Middle Belt, and also working in Northeast Nigeria. So thank you very much, and I'm very glad to be here with everyone.
Thank you. We're grateful that you've made the time. Tog, I wonder if we could turn to you, if you could sort of introduce yourself and Mercy Corps, but also could you briefly describe the security situation in Nigeria as you see it now?
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Hope you can hear me loud and clear. I'm a senior conflict and peace advisor with Mercy Corps, supporting our technical teams across the world. I'm currently based out of Nigeria. I've been working with Mercy Corps since 2013, when Mercy Corps started its programs in Nigeria. Basically, the work we've been doing over the years is promoting peace building, delivering emergency assistance, and supporting communities to strengthen economic resilience. Our core outcome areas in Nigeria focuses on economic opportunities, food insecurity, peace and good governance, and also water security to ensure that our citizens are empowered, engaged, resilient, and secure. We also do some work across the Sahel to strengthen inclusive, locally led justice systems, natural resource management, and conflict management to reduce violence and bolster resilience to conflict shocks and rebuild trust between citizens and the state. Just to give a conflict profile of what we're experiencing currently in Nigeria, I would focus on northern Nigeria. Nigeria at this time is experiencing several conflicts driven by multiple issues and factors that have led to the loss of lives, but also the loss of livelihoods of millions of Nigerians across this region. Whether it's issues that deal with issues around ideological differences, issues around natural resource management, whether it's issues around political grievances, and also criminality and banditry that we are seeing in northwest Nigeria. And several factors, whether it's climate change, whether it's the failure of government to address these issues, or just the lack of opportunities for several groups across this region has contributed to the current situation that we find ourselves in.
Thank you, that's really clear. This inquiry is very much focused on Nigeria and how the UK is supporting Nigeria. Should we actually be looking more broadly at the region, particularly when it comes to security? Tog, if I could ask you that.
I would say yes. It's important to look at beyond Nigeria. This conflict, what started at what seemed to be highly localized, has changed in dynamics over time. We're seeing an infiltration of different groups across the Sahel. We're seeing the impacts of climate change also affecting this conflict. Then there's issues of forced migration. And these are not issues that Nigeria alone tackles or deals with independently. These are very much similar issues that we see manifested across this region as well. And it will require a more strategic and coordinated approach to deal with this conflict more holistically. We are already beginning to see that in terms of countries or nations coming together to tackle the security challenges we face today. But there's still so much that needs to be done if we are trying to address the root causes of this conflict.
And to address the root causes, do we need to look broader than just Nigeria? And do you think it's possible with development work to address them? Sorry, again, to you, Tom.
Yes, can you repeat the question?
Yes, you said that we need to address the root causes. To address those root causes, should we just be looking at Nigeria or the region? And do you think with development work it is possible to address them?
I think as I mentioned earlier, saying that development work alone will be able to address the root causes might be far-fetched. I think we need to work as a team, and this requires a coordinated response with security, government, and development actors as well. I think what we have struggled with over time is commitment from all these individual actors to work together, share information, and begin to address these root causes together. Understanding that this is a shared problem that needs to be addressed by all of us. Understanding that conflict does not lie in isolation, but we are seeing how these conflicts have gradually flowed into other locations in this region as well. So I would say a lot of work needs to be done. However, I think with conversations like this happening and having such stakeholders in the room, I think we can be able to develop a clear path on how to begin to address this more sustainably.
Thank you, that's very clear. Bryan, you were nodding along to much of what Todd was saying. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about how Search for Common Ground works to reduce the instability in Nigeria.
Yes, thank you very much. So, yeah, and I agree with a lot of what Todd was saying. You know, a lot of those factors and causes, they're international, they're regional, but they're also deeply local as well and deeply locally rooted. And Search for Common Ground, we use a variety of approaches. We're an international organization, but we do work very closely at the local level. So one of our key processes that we do is that we establish, particularly in Nigeria, we've worked through peace architecture, where we've established different levels of peace building and conflict transformation platforms at the community level, at the LGA level, at the state level, that work really to look at what are the localized root causes of these conflicts and how can we address them. How can they be addressed at the community level, and then where do we need to have that, higher level of interaction? Where does it need to be escalated to the LGA level or to the state level, and have higher level security responses? So we've done a lot of different work. I would say that is kind of at the root of our methodology, but we've expanded beyond that. We have a number of projects ongoing where we're working on freedom of religion or belief, and we've done a lot of case management, and when we get alerts of religious violations, providing legal support, case management support. We've had a number of early warning, early response projects going across the region. Of course, we also do a lot on conflict assessment and conflict analysis in areas across the region. And then Search for Common Ground really got its start as a media organization. So, you know, we recognize the power of the media, whether that's traditional media, traditionally radio, and television, but now we're also doing a lot around the digital media space, social media, you know, to look at these causes, and how we can address it in a more holistic manner. But we're generally, I mean, our focus is still kind of at the grassroots level, at the community level, recognizing that that's one part of the solution. You know, that's you know, that a lot of the conflict can be addressed at, you know, locally at the grassroots level, but it also needs political solutions, and you know, as a lot of the drivers of the conflict are much broader.
Thank you very much. And could I ask you, are any of the UN or UK aid cuts affecting your organisation, Bryan?
UN and UK aid cuts have not directly affected us, but US aid cuts have did affect us quite significantly. Yes.
Okay, Todd, the same question to you.
Yes, I will just echo what Bryan said. Yes, the US cuts affected us significantly. For example, we basically, within the country, we have basically, after having several peace building programs at the moment, we're only having one that is focusing on transitional justice in approaches in the Northwest. Unfortunately, the budget cuts hit us quite hard, whether it's in our humanitarian programming in the Northeast and our peace building, like I mentioned. A lot of that had to be scaled back or stopped immediately. And unfortunately for us, we did have significant funding for small town WASH implementation. That was stopped abruptly as well, but we were able to get some private donor funding to allow us to at least complete the construction of that infrastructure in the Bay States, in the Northeast Nigeria, and also parts of the Southeast as well.
Well, hopefully the US government will realise the important work that you do and turn that around, particularly as the president seems to be interested in security in Nigeria. I'll pass over to my colleague, Bryan.
Thanks. So, Tog, if I can go to you. How important is Nigeria to regional stability?
Great question. So, not only is Nigeria an economic powerhouse in the region, we also have a sizable population that, God forbid, if any major humanitarian crisis should hit Nigeria again, would have significant impact on the neighboring countries and maybe across Africa as well. So it's important that governments like the UK, US, and other partners watch Nigeria quite closely, whether it's in terms of security, but also in issues around building our economy and ensuring that individuals or citizens have economic opportunities to progress and diversify their livelihoods. These are the root causes that affect the stability of the region or contribute to the instability that Nigeria is currently facing, where our government has been unable to address independently. So it's important that Nigeria's problem is viewed more as a regional problem and maybe even a global problem, as against focusing it as a problem that affects only the state as well.
Okay, if I can follow on with that, to what extent is Nigerian stability and security compromised by instability in the wider region, including Sudan?
Including Sudan. Okay. I think in terms of Nigeria's, so they are, I would say this is unofficial reports. We are seeing movement of groups along that corridor as well, forming into terrorist groups or organizations or linkages to terrorist groups from those locations as well. And this has been a major force. So bringing these groups come with various grievances against the state as well, and they're able to capitalize on at-risk Nigerian citizens who also bear similar grievances against the Nigerian government as well. And this forms an easy route for the recruitment of Nigerians into these armed groups, and very well, and that's part of the reason why we're seeing a lot of so many groups springing up in Nigeria of recent. So while we are able to think of the IS and a few other groups like Boko Haram, there are a lot of splinter groups that are operating in a lot of ungoverned spaces across Nigeria, and the Nigerian government is still unable to grapple with that situation as it stands.
Can I ask, this is a related question, but has there been any thought about Sudan, about Nigeria playing a role maybe with the African Union in dealing with the bigger problem in Sudan? You know, the terrible war that's happening there.
To the best of my knowledge, I don't know of any conversations Nigeria is currently engaged with the African Union in terms of the situation in Sudan. I would need to get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you. And now, Bryan, from one Bryan to another Bryan, what assessment have you made of the potential for displacement of Nigerians arising from current instability?
I mean, I think we're seeing large levels of displacement across the country in many areas. I remember I first moved to Nigeria in 2018 and lived in Nigeria from 2018 through early 2025. And it was kind of, the major displacement area was in Northeast Nigeria, but now we're seeing displacement across the middle belt in Benue State and significantly in Northwest Nigeria. So I think the displacement crisis was never resolved in Northeast Nigeria. I mean, there's still a lot of displacement in Northeast Nigeria, even as there was a technical closure of the camps there a few years ago. But it has become a crisis across the country.
And how might this add to instability across the whole region?
I mean, I think it's similar to a lot of what Tog said. I mean, there is a significant regional factor. I mean, there is the instability in the Sahel countries and the AES countries that is spilling over into Nigeria. But ultimately, a big part of the instability comes from lack of opportunities, grievances, unaddressed problems. And the more displacement there is in a country, the greater those drivers towards joining armed groups is going to be. So you have people youth particularly living in IDP camps, in situations of displacement, inability to get education, lack of jobs, lack of opportunities. They then become very easy targets for recruitment. So I think you're going to see the more instability. It's a continuing cycle. The more instability, the more displacement. You're going to have greater, drivers and root causes that are going to continue this problem.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, David.
Bryan, could I ask you how much of a role religion plays in the conflict and instability across Nigeria?
Yeah, and I think that's been a big topic that has been talked a lot about lately, and the way we kind of look at it is that yes, of course, religion does play a role, but it is not the root cause. It is not the driver of the conflict. It's I think there's a lot of tendency to paint the situation in very black and white terms, and that everything comes down to religion and it's a religious conflict. But what we've seen over and over and over again, even in the Middle Belt, even in the Boko Haram crisis, is that religion is not the root cause. It is sort of how, in many ways, in many situations, it's how the conflict is being framed. Particularly in the Middle Belt, it is being framed in religious terms, and people are using religion, as a form of expression in the conflict. But it is not, it is at its core, it is not the root cause of the conflict. I remember I was head of office in Maiduguri for 2.5 years. And even in the Boko Haram crisis, you're working with people. We worked a bit with youth who had been separated from Boko Haram, and really what we would hear over and over and over again, that the drivers of joining Boko Haram are not this passionate religious extremism. Same with the banditry groups, even though a lot of times they frame themselves as committing jihad, or it's really the core drivers are lack of opportunities, lack of jobs, poor governance, and multifaceted challenges, and even back to to climate change and natural resource conflict that are creating these challenges. So the way we've looked at it is that, yes, religion is a strong factor, and you can't deny that. I mean, especially right now, what's going on in the Middle Belt, there are Christian communities that, feel very much targeted as Christian communities. And as we know, in Nigeria, there have been cycles of religious conflict. But, I think what has been tending lately is this oversimplification, as this is a purely religious conflict, or that there is a Christian persecution or a Christian genocide, as some people are saying. And we feel, and what we've seen is that oversimplification doesn't really address what are the root causes, and it also then risks making the conflict more religious than it necessarily is, because then you've given that framing, then you've given that term, so then it's very easy to kind of allow the conflict to become, to be exacerbated along religious terms.
So what sort of work do you do to reduce religious tensions then?
So we've done a lot of work. We had at one point, we had a series of 5 different complementary projects on freedom of religion or belief. And one of the big parts of those projects is that we worked on interfaith groups. So we established interfaith networks recently in recent projects in Plateau State, in Kaduna State, and in Bauchi State. We worked very closely with the National Interreligious Council, NIREC, across the country. And the idea is just bringing religious leaders across, from different faiths together to jointly address conflicts in communities. And to kind of take the religious fervor or the religious power out of them. And we've had some good successes in that. We've been able to, through some of our work, we've been able to prevent lynching or mob violence related to religion. And a lot of different ways of addressing that. We've also, as I mentioned earlier, we also worked with providing legal support and case management support to people who are victims of religious violence.
And Tog, what's your perception of the reports or statements on persecution against Christians in Nigeria? Do you agree with Bryan's analysis?
Yes, I do. I do agree with it. However, let's be. Nigeria has its own challenges when it comes to issues of religious tolerance, right? And I think as Nigerians, we need to do more. So obviously, we need to see more action from our government we need to see them acknowledging that this could potentially push Nigeria into more deeper and complicated conflicts that we are already experiencing. We do acknowledge that being a very diverse, multi-ethnic society, it's very easy for um, people that benefit from conflict to use religion as a tool to perpetuate violence. We acknowledge that. And I think our governments need to do more to raise awareness that this is happening or has the potential to spiral out of control and take concrete action to bring people to account that use this as a tool for personal interest. However, just as Bryan said, it is too simplistic to say that Nigeria is experiencing religious conflicts. If you look at the demographics of Nigeria and the population, there are more people collaborating, living across religious lines than people that are polarized. So that rhetoric or that narrative has the potential to cause much more damage to already a fragile situation. So I think there needs to be more support externally, internally to change that narrative, but also back it up with action. Mercy Corps has implemented a few interreligious peace building programs in the past where we brought religious leaders to counter these narratives that discourage religious tolerance and harmony. We had them come together to engage in dialogues on the misrepresentation or misinterpretation of some of the scripture we find in the most dominant religions in Nigeria, and also had them come together to also do shared joint projects together that will continue to promote religious harmony. And this project, I think when Mercy Corps came into Nigeria in 2013, we had a counterpart funding for religious funding that worked side by side with funding from the UK under a program that was titled Concur to work on not just the economic or structural factors that are exacerbating the farmer-herder conflict, but also to begin to discuss the narratives that that conflict is a religious conflict. And I think we also recorded a lot of success in terms of building religious harmony in local communities that we worked in.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting. James.
Thank you, Chair. I guess similar question, but turning attention away from religion and more towards climate change, and this is to Tog. To what extent do you view climate change as the key driver or one of the key drivers in conflict and instability across Nigeria? And are there any particular parts of Nigeria where you see climate being particularly problematic, or climate change?
I think a few years ago, I implemented a program with Search for Common Ground in the northeast part of Nigeria, in Adamawa State to be precise. And we conducted a study early on to understand whether communities understood the role that climate was playing in the conflicts that they were experiencing and continue to experience. And the findings were significant, where communities felt that it was a hoax. So part of our approach was to begin to work with these communities for them to understand the linkages or the role that climate plays in terms of driving this conflict. And what we did was to look at the pathways in terms of which climate can easily manifest into violence in their communities. We're currently working with communities across Nigeria and hopefully in the Sahel to develop tools, community-driven tools that will allow community members to conduct the analysis on their own and reach an understanding of the role that climate plays and the roles they can contribute in terms of mitigating the effects of climate change. And that could be as simple as climate adaptation strategies or changing their livelihood options. within the locations that they are in. I would say all the major conflicts, if you look at the pathways, whether it's the economic issues, whether it's around migration, whether it's natural resource competition, I would say all of the major conflicts that we are experiencing in Nigeria can show those linkages in terms of how climate is exacerbating the current tensions that we currently face across northern Nigeria. However, there is insufficient funding and support from stakeholders at various levels to begin to finance these types of locally led interventions to allow communities to push these interventions and find solutions that work for them. And we're hopeful that with little efforts, whether it's with Mercy Corps and our partners, we can be able to provide evidence-driven interventions that can begin to show that it's possible for communities to play a leading role in resolving these conflicts or addressing the climate shocks that they face.
And you described climate there as underpinning a number of conflicts. To what extent do you think it's also a key driver of forcing the displacement of people? Clearly, conflict can displace people. To what extent do you see the climate as driving the displacement of people in and of itself?
So if you look at one of the challenges we faced from the budget cuts is we no longer have up-to-date information in terms of displacement figures. So for example, Bryan mentioned earlier on that there is a huge displacement in even the central part of Nigeria. And at this time, we're not even sure of the precise figures of the amount of people that have been displaced as a result of this conflict that has affected farming and herder communities.
Todd,
and a lot of these people...
Todd, can I interrupt? Why, because of funding cuts, are you no longer getting that information?
Yes, so a lot of the donor organizations that were working had to abruptly end their programs, whether it's data on migration figures, whether it's data on incidents that are happening in the communities, like how Search for Common Ground has been working in these local communities as well. A lot of this data that the government was dependent on actually came from the NGOs.
Wow.
Itself. And when the NGOs are no longer functioning, that information is no longer up to date. I think that the last displacement figures we have for the Northeast came in 2024, sometime in October. And we're already in 2026. And I think those figures for the Northeast are placing the figure around 2.2 million people displaced. However, we do know that these numbers are significantly higher, especially when we see the conflicts that are raging in the Sahel and the migratory patterns that we're experiencing across those regions as well.
Wow.
That's really helpful. Can I just switch to Bryan and get your takes? Similar theme, really, Bryan. But I guess I understand that you do specific work around conflict prevention relating to natural resources. Is that something that you could expand on?
Yeah. So, and saying on that, we, a big part of our project is our work is on farmer-herder conflict and land resources, and that really is tied to climate change. Even though it's a bit more on the macro level, and is also related to population, but you have traditional nomadic herding groups that, because of desertification, are getting pushed further and further and further south in the Sahel into the more populated farming bands. And that is triggering a lot of this conflict, which has then become framed in religious terms, because the herders are often Muslim and the farmers, at least in some regions of Nigeria, are primarily Christian. Yeah. And what we see, in the past, there were traditional, it was kind of a complementary process, where farmers could only farm in a certain season. And then, the herders would come through and they would eat, the cattle would eat the leftovers of the farms. and then leave their droppings, which were then fertilizer for the next year's planting season. But now with newer technology, there is a year-round farming season, so there's less of a need for the herders. So all of these factors play, are one of the most volatile conflicts in Nigeria, particularly in the Middle Belt, particularly in Adamawa. And we've worked on that quite a bit. We had a 4-year-long project in Adamawa and Taraba states called Comitas. It was EU funded, that really worked on addressing and mitigating that farmer-herder conflict, and were able to, at least in one of the core volatile bands of Adamawa state, to really kind of significantly reduce farmer-herder incidents. But it's a broad conflict, and it's only going to get worse with climate change and as herders are being pushed further south. It's something that needs both grassroots level support, but also broader political level support. And a lot of the violence and conflict that is happening in Nigeria is in some ways related to these to these different patterns. So that's our main natural resource conflict, has been around farmer-herder conflict. We've also have done some work on natural resource conflict related to fishermen, and then a bit in the Niger Delta region as well, as far as conflict related to oil extraction and natural resource extraction.
And with those latter two examples, would a different model be deployed relative to the primary example that you gave?
The core model is the same. Obviously the issues are different, but the core model of, on one level, the community level peace building is critical and is important, because a lot of the issues can be resolved at the community level. But that also needs to be complemented by higher level, political action and government action. In the case of farmer-herder conflicts, it's, how can you get the political will to come up with a more appropriate solution of addressing the farmer-herder conflicts. And with that, we set up a structure called the Forum on Farmer-Herder Relations, which is now no longer directly connected to us, but is ongoing, and it's looking at what policies can be put in place to address this from a political level. Of course, in the Niger Delta, the oil-related conflict, yes, same thing, you can resolve community-level conflicts, but when one of the core conflict drivers are, large oil companies that are causing environmental destruction, and then you also need to engage at a higher level. So the relative structure is pretty much the same: community level engagement complemented by higher level political engagement.
And to what extent do you think that approach, given the pace and scale of climate change, do you think that approach is sustainable within Nigeria? How is resource management going to be managed politically over the coming years?
It's sustainable, but I would say, like so many peace building efforts, it's kind of a drop in the bucket. A lot of times peace building gets very limited amounts of funding, projects that are on a very short term. And a lot of these require long-term work, long-term investments, and long-term political engagement. So yeah, it is sustainable and it works, but it requires the commitment. It's not necessarily an easy, quick solution. And it requires support to civil society actors, peace building actors, INGOs, but it also requires, engagement, bilateral engagement, government to government engagement, and work with the private sector as well. As we know, climate change is a major issue affecting the work. I don't think it's any more or less complex in Nigeria. I mean, of course, Nigeria is not faced with some of the extinction level concerns that some countries like Tuvalu or some small island nations are facing. But, Nigeria is experiencing, particularly with flooding, there have been increasingly severe flooding incidents. So it is a complex situation. It's not, I think this approach could work, but it needs more dedicated efforts at all levels, with civil society and INGOs, such as Mercy Corps Search, as well as the other civil society organizations that spoke earlier, but also with companies and with governments.
Thank you very much. Over to Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. That moves us nicely, I guess, into localisation. I have a few questions for you both, but I'll maybe start with Tog. Tog, what support do local organisations need to better engage with international donors?
Okay, thanks for that question. So at Mercy Corps, for example, we invest a lot in localization. And some of the tools and the processes that we have developed for this are designed to strengthen the abilities and capacities to lead the process for their change. So we believe in equitable partnerships. That has been like a centerpiece for our localization approach and has been one of the work streams that we have pushed forward. And that means having a commitment to the partnership between us as an organization and the communities as well, towards a common goal. And this equitable partnership needs to be based on mutually beneficial outcomes, and also ensuring that each of us are accountable to each other. I think it's a myth. We've passed the stage of saying that communities are unable to challenge or channel or lead the change that they want to see. So we believe in providing those capacities where the communities themselves identify what the needs have been. We have several instances where we have brought in even local community leaders and authorities to also help us in the design of our implementation, to ensure that it is tailored or meeting the needs of the communities where this will be implemented. So it's important that through our localization approach, that the community's voice is heard and seen and felt right there in the communities as well. I think as development partner leaders or NGOs, we need to invest in inclusive sector advocacy. So what that means is we provide the environment and the leadership using our influence to guide the communities and let them advocate for the change. I think this has been a very rewarding experience for us at Mercy Corps because it allows us to reflect, go back and learn that sometimes these approaches might not be the most appropriate or the most timely, and it allows us to go back and make those changes. I think one of the things we continue to advocate is as we pursue our localization approach with our communities and stakeholders, that our donors or funders are more provide us with a listening ear to make our program much more adaptive to the changes that we see on the ground, whether it's the impacts or the risks of climate change or the revolving conflicts that we are seeing in the communities. It's important that we continue to adapt. And I think localization allows us to do that.
Thank you. And Bryan, your picture disappeared, but hopefully you can still hear us. Could you set out how your organisation works with local organisations to develop early warning systems?
Yeah, so thank you. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Yeah, you're back on. We have your picture again as well.
Okay, great. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened. But yes, and I think we take, localization is a core part of Search's work, and we take a holistic approach to localization. Yes, we work with local civil society organizations and build their capacity. That's a core part of it. But what we do specifically around early warning is that we develop structures, the peace architecture structures that I was talking about earlier, that are comprised of local actors. We either develop structures or we work with existing structures. If there is an existing structure, we don't want to recreate the wheel and do something completely different. And we work with those structures. We support those structures on early warning, early response. But then our goal, especially when we're getting towards the second half of a project, when we know that funding will end, is how can we create, how can we ensure that those structures are able to continue operating on their own? So that's been a big part of what we do. We help structures get registered as local civil society entities. We help them register with the Corporate Affairs Commission. And we try and build up a space or build up a structure that allows them to continue their own fundraising and to continue their own work. And we've had a lot of successes, a lot of structures that have continued. Of course, not all of them have continued and have been able to continue to do early warning, early response work. I know that Search for Common Ground, two of the big peace-building agencies, the Plateau Peace-Building Agency and the Kaduna Peace-Building Agency, I know that Search for Common Ground was very closely involved with them in the early days. It's one of those things where, if we can partner with those structures we've created again in the future and future projects, we always try and do that. But we're not, we're happy to see that structures that we've supported continue on their own. And we're happy to share our tools and resources. If people are using our methodologies and tools, we consider that a success, so I think that's one of our big approaches to localization, and it's worked particularly well with our eWare platforms. That eWare has to be, they have to be structures that are locally led and locally run. Otherwise, they're not going to be active. So yeah.
Thank you. And back to Tog, how do you think the UK could improve its model on engagement across Nigeria in relation to localization?
I would say I think the UK, and I see the new approach is to work closer with governments. That's important. We have examples of where this localization approach has worked with UK funding in Mali on our JAS program, where we have used that support or that intervention to enhance the capacities of land commissions, natural resource management committees from the government to begin to lead the development of their communities. So I think that's one entry point as well, to begin to understand how to make localization more effective. I think as well, the UK should prioritize evidence-based programming as well, find out what works, what doesn't work within the communities. And the UK has done a good job in doing that. I know in the past, we've received UK funding to conduct mediation work using insider mediators in our communities to resolve local disputes, using a combination of our approaches, which is an interest-based mediation approach, but at the same time integrating some traditional approaches to mediation as well. And these have been effective across northern Nigeria. We've worked in numerous states. I think the UK funded back then, we were working in 4 states in the Middle Belt. it's important that we begin to intensify those kind of traditional or community-led approaches to prevention, but also the management of disputes locally. So yeah, I would say those are the things that come to mind for now.
Thank you. And Bryan, just on that, what do you think the UK does well, or maybe not so well, in its approach to reducing instability across Nigeria?
I think, and this is an area we haven't, Search hasn't had direct funding from the UK recently, but we've been, we're just starting involvement with a big project called PropCom Plus. So what I can say, and we've been involved a little bit in the spring project as well, and what I've seen that I really like are these projects that combine a conflict element with a natural resource management element. It's a large, long-term consortium-focused project that look at all of the different causes. Because it is, of course, it's a complex, the instability is a complex situation. And Search for Common Ground, we're very, very specifically a conflict transformation and peace building organization. We don't do, humanitarian work or development work, but but we like to partner on these big consortium projects because you can't address one issue without the other. You can't address farming inputs and agriculture in a context where there is significant insecurity without also having a peace building and security and stability component. And you also can't do a purely peace building intervention in a place where people have severe food security and development needs. So that's what I've noticed in the projects that I'm aware of and that we've been connected to, is that they really are multifaceted projects that address a lot of the core context in Nigeria. So that's what I can say on that.
So do you think the UK pays enough attention to that holistic approach that you've highlighted?
I mean, yes, I think so. It's hard to say in depth on that, but I know that there have been some budgetary constraints. I know from our experience in PropCom, there was discussion that we would be involved earlier, but then it was kind of limited budget, and of course, the peace and security section always. When there's a budget constraint is always often the first to go. But yeah, I mean, I think there is definitely need for more focus, more funding, but the sense that I get from the projects I've been associated is that yes, that it is taking a good approach.
Thank you both for your answers. Back to the chair.
Thank you, gentlemen. You've given us loads of evidence and presented it really, really clearly. Thank you for that. The work that you do is fabulous, and I hope the most recent round of funding cuts coming from the UK don't land too harshly. Thank you for keeping going in a very difficult global financial situation. We need you, and we need the work that you do. Unless committee members have other questions, order, this session is now closed.